Storytelling. The street had always prided itself on being a serene, predictable enclave. Manicured lawns, neatly spaced mailboxes, and standardized facade colors gave the illusion of perfect harmony. But harmony had never accounted for someone like Karen. She carried herself with the rigid determination of a self-appointed enforcer, scanning the neighborhood each morning as if patrolling a kingdom that only she truly understood. The arrival of backyard chickens, my backyard chickens, disrupted her sense of order in a way nothing else had before. The coop itself wasn't remarkable. In fact, it met every requirement laid out by the county's small livestock ordinance. It was anchored in the far corner of the yard, shielded by shrubs, insulated enough not to bother anyone. The hens were quiet, industrious creatures who spent their days scratching at the soil and offering the soft reward of eggs. The entire setup coexisted peacefully with the neighborhood, at least until Karen noticed it. Her fixation formed quickly. At first, it revealed itself in the form of long, conspicuous pauses near the fence line, where she hovered with pointed intensity, as though documenting non-existent misdeeds. Then came the strategically loud comments muttered just within earshot, statements laced with exaggerated disgust, as if she were reacting not to harmless animals but to some unsanctioned biohazard. The neighbors, accustomed to her flair for dramatics, paid little mind, but her resentment bloomed, gripping her with a certainty that she alone needed to restore the neighborhood to its imagined purity. Her first attempt involved casual complaint slipped into conversation with residents who didn't ask for her opinions. Each comment laid the groundwork for a narrative she hoped others would adopt, that the chickens posed a threat, that they violated an unwritten code of suburban normalcy, but her efforts were met with disinterest. Some neighbors confessed they hadn't even realized chickens were near them. Others found the idea charming. This only sharpened her frustration. The shift from passive judgment to active action happened abruptly one Tuesday morning. A county enforcement vehicle lingered near the cul-de-sac, prompting curious glances through kitchen windows. The officer stepped out, holding a clipboard, his expression neutral but observant. Karen watched from her driveway, arms crossed with vindication, convinced her efforts had succeeded. She trailed the officer at a respectable but unmistakably eager distance as he entered my property. The inspection unfolded with clinical precision. The officer moved slowly, scanning the coop, measuring distances, verifying placement, ventilation, and sanitation. It became clear even to Karen, who hovered at the legally permissible edge of my property, that everything aligned with regulations. Still, she waited for something, anything that might validate her complaint. But no violation emerged. The officer recorded his findings, offering nothing to the woman watching from the street. Her impatience deepened, tightening her posture and eroding the smugness she arrived with. She'd expected a swift shutdown, an official reprimand, or at the very least a warning issued in her honor. But the officer's tone remained neutral, and his focus remained on the documented facts rather than Karen's expectations. Eventually, he thanked me for my cooperation and stepped back into the street. Karen intercepted him with an exaggerated urgency, waving her hands as though hoping to conjure violations through sheer insistence. Her words came in a tumble of grievances, claims of noise, smell, community disruption. The officer listened, maintaining the same steady composure, but his interest sharpened only when she mentioned something she should have omitted: the supposed long list of unreported infractions plaguing the entire neighborhood. That phrase caught his attention for reasons she didn't anticipate. It wasn't a confirmation of wrongdoing, it was an invitation to investigate further. His guys traveled along the surrounding properties, landing momentarily on Karen's backyard, where a structure barely visible from the road caught his eye. Within a moment, the officer's expression shifted with measured curiosity. Karen, blissfully unaware of the attention she had redirected, continued her tirade. By the time she realized where he was looking, the damage had already been done. The officer asked a single, simple question about the shed behind her home, a shed no one remembered seeing before the previous year. The color drained from her face, the first crack in her confident facade. She deflected, citing gardening needs, seasonal storage, and vague justifications, but his matter remained unmoved. The inspection she had demanded for someone else was now turning toward her, and the weight of her own unpermitted projects threatened to surface. As he walked toward her property, clipboard in hand, Karen's composure began to crumble. The chickens, unaware of the drama unfolding around them, clucked softly in the distance, indifferent to the chain reaction she had set into motion. The officer paused only to request access, leaving Karen frozen in a moment she had not planned for. The crusade she launched was looping back toward her in a trajectory she never imagined. And as he stepped through her gate, the real unraveling began. The officer's arrival in Karen's backyard marked a shift so sharp it nearly altered the atmosphere. Gone was her earlier swagger, that performative authority she wielded with such certainty. Instead, she hovered at a cautious distance, an anxious stiffness tightening her shoulders. The backyard, usually shielded from public view, now stood exposed under an unfiltered lens of accountability she had never anticipated. The shed was the centerpiece of the officer's scrutiny. It loomed awkwardly in the corner, too large for its location, too freshly built to pass as something long-standing. The paint was newer than the fence it pressed against, and the foundation, if it had one at all, seemed improvised at best. Its placement violated setback requirements by a visible margin, something even a casual observer might notice. Karen had built it quietly, confidently assuming no one would challenge her decision. After all, she considered herself the guardian of standards. Why would anyone question her own? The officer circled it slowly, documenting its dimensions with practiced precision. With each measurement, Karen's unease deepened. She attempted to justify its existence: seasonal equipment, extra storage, household overflow. But these explanations did not address the core issue: permission. The county required permits for structures of that size, and the records offered no trace of one. From the shed, the officer's attention shifted to the modifications around it. A rain collection system had been installed improperly, with pipes redirecting water toward neighboring fences instead of designated drainage areas. A makeshift patio extension, constructed from uneven pavers, violated regulations regarding impermeable surfaces. A compost pile sat too close to the property line, improperly contained, and visibly attracting pests. Every area he examined unveiled another oversight, another infraction Karen had assumed would go unnoticed. With each revelation, the officer's notes multiplied. Karen's facade fractured further. What began as a mission to expose perceived problems in someone else's yard had now shifted into a spotlight illuminating her own. The irony settled heavily in the air, a weight the chickens across the street remained blissfully oblivious to as they rustled through their run. The neighbors, drawn by instinctive curiosity, observed from discreet vantage points. Curtains shifted. Garage doors paused mid-closing. A few pretended to sweep driveways while stealing glances at the unfolding scene. They knew Karen as a force of relentless oversight, a presence that policed everything from mailbox colors to lawn heights. To see her subjected to the authority she so freely invoked was an unspoken spectacle that needed no commentary. The officer continued his inspection, moving methodically through her yard. When he reached the back fence, he paused again, this time at the sight of an electrical line snaking precariously from the house to the shed. It had no conduit, no protection, no compliance with safety standards. It was not simply a violation, it was a hazard. The officer's demeanor tightened just enough to suggest concern beyond paperwork. Karen's reaction to this particular discovery reflected her shifting internal state. Panic flickered behind her attempts at composure. She searched for explanations, each more strained than the last. The officer offered no comfort, no hint of leniency, only the calm, procedural acknowledgement of a professional responsible for ensuring safety and compliance. Her long-held belief that she operated above reproach crumbled more visibly with each passing minute. As the inspection wrapped up, the officer stepped back, surveying the totality of what he had documented. The shed, the drainage violations, the improper electrical work, the non-compliant patio, the pest-attacking compost, each item formed a list far longer and more severe than anything she had accused my chickens of causing. The imbalance of her crusade now stood revealed, stark and undeniable. The officer informed her that a formal report would follow, along with the necessary steps for bringing her property into compliance. The list would not be short, nor expensive. Karen's expression shifted through disbelief, humiliation, and a deeply rooted frustration that could find no outward target. The chickens were no longer the issue. Now the problem lay within her own boundaries. As the officer departed, the neighborhood returned to its usual quiet, though it carried the lingering echo of the morning's events. Karen retreated into her house, closing the door, with a tension that resonated across the street. What had begun as an attack on my backyard chickens had evolved into a reckoning in her own yard, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold.
In the weeks following the inspection, the neighborhood experienced a rare shift in energy. Karen, once the ever-present sentinel of suburban conformity, receded from view. Her usual routines, morning patrols, unsolicited lawn critiques, elaborate seasonal decorations, quietly vanished. The absence was noticeable, but the community greeted it with a mixture of relief and curiosity. The county's official report arrived swiftly. It detailed a comprehensive list of violations: unpermitted construction, safety hazards, code breaches, and improper waste management. Each item required corrective action, accompanied by fines calibrated to the severity of the infraction. The total sum was substantial, enough to strain any homeowner's budget. Even more daunting was the mandated removal of the shed unless she could retroactively meet compliance, an unlikely outcome given its placement and construction. Word spread quickly, not through gossip, but through the subtle channels of suburban observation. Neighbors noticed contractors arriving, estimates being given, and frustrated expressions crossing her face as she navigated the consequences of her earlier choices. The shed that once symbolized her private authority now stood as a looming reminder of her miscalculation, doomed to dismantling. Meanwhile, life on my property continued with an ease that contrasted sharply with her turmoil. The chickens clucked softly through the mornings, offering a steady supply of eggs and an unexpectedly comforting routine. Their presence served as a reminder of how small the original conflict had been compared to the spiral it triggered. Their coop required no adjustments, no permits, no repairs, just simple maintenance and an occasional handful of feed. The more Karen tried to conceal the fallout, the more visible it became. Contractors hauled away debris, wrestled with improperly installed pavers, and patched the unsafe electrical setup. The shed's dismantling was the most symbolic moment. Each plank removed seemed to peel away another layer of her self-appointed authority. Watching it come down felt like observing the slow unraveling of a persona built on control and criticism. The neighborhood watched with restrained fascination. No one gloated publicly, though private satisfaction undoubtedly simmered beneath polite expressions. For years, residents had endured her unsolicited warnings about improper trash can placement, holiday lights left too long, grass that grew half an inch too tall. Her downfall served as a quiet, collective vindication. Yet the story did not end merely with penalties and repairs. The final twist emerged when the county conducted a follow-up inspection to ensure that all issues had been resolved. The officer returned, clipboard in hand, ready to verify compliance. Karen, still humiliated but anxious to close the ordeal, guided him through the now corrected areas. The patio had been reset properly, the drainage system redirected water appropriately, the electrical hazard had been removed entirely, the compost was relocated and secured. The shed was gone, replaced by bare soil and a lingering sense of defeat. The officer nodded with approval, marking off item after item. But as he concluded his walkthrough, something unexpected happened. His gaze drifted toward her side yard, a narrow strip often overlooked. There, partially concealed behind a row of shrubs, sat a cluster of large, decorative statues installed well beyond the acceptable boundary. Their placement violated setback rules just as the shed had before. It was an oversight Karen had forgotten amidst the chaos, yet it was enough to trigger another citation. For a moment, she stood completely still, absorbing the realization that even after all her corrective efforts, she remained noncompliant. The frustration etched across her features reflected a recognition she had long resisted. In her attempt to enforce standards on others, she had neglected her own. The new citation was smaller, far less severe than the previous list, but symbolically it was the final blow. The officer departed once more, leaving her to reckon with the last remnants of a conflict she had ignited but could never control. Over time, the drama subsided. Karen became a quieter presence, no longer patrolling the street or policing her neighbors' yards. She trimmed her hedges less meticulously, allowed seasonal decorations to remain modest, and kept to herself more often. The shift wasn't dramatic, but it was noticeable, a humbled retreat from the role she once embraced. The neighborhood settled back into its steady rhythm. The chickens continued their peaceful existence, offering a small but comforting reminder that some things remain unaffected by human drama. Their coop, once the center of unnecessary conflict, became a symbol of resilience against pettiness. In the end, Karen's crusade had accomplished nothing she intended. Instead of eliminating a harmless coop, she had exposed her own violations, incurred significant fines, and reshaped her place within the community. Her attempt to control the neighborhood had resulted in her losing control of her own narrative. The story spread quietly from house to house, retold in soft tones and knowing glances. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder that vigilance without self-awareness leads only to downfall, and that those who seek trouble in others' yards may find far more of it in their own. And in the quiet mornings that followed, as the chickens pecked contentedly at the soil, the neighborhood finally found the harmony it had been missing, not through enforcement, but through the unexpected, humbling downfall of its most notorious watchdog.